What if everything you believed about justice was wrong? Imagine a slow camera pan across an empty interrogation room, a single bulb humming, the chair still warm from a confession that may never have been true. What if the person sitting in a cell right now, branded as a monster, is completely innocent? Tonight we move through cases that were supposedly solved, but probably got it all wrong. The justice system markets certainty, closure, answers, an end to fear. But that certainty can be a mirage. In the frantic search for someone to blame, pressure mounts. From the public, from grieving families, from headlines that demand a culprit. Investigators tighten their focus. Witnesses are reshaped by suggestion. Forensic interpretations harden into narrative. And in the cold, methodical light of hindsight, those same certainties often unravel. Listen to the silence these cases leave behind. Not just the absence of truth, but the emotional void. Families who trade genuine answers for a named defendant. Communities that sleep easier at the cost of fairness. And the hollow triumph of a conviction that may conceal the real horror. We begin with 3 teenagers in Arkansas, then move to a Texas fire that should have never been labeled arson. Each story is ordinary in its details, and extraordinary in the way systems failed them. Watch the pans slow, and listen for the small, uncomfortable questions. May 5th, 1993. In West Memphis, Arkansas, 3 8-year-old boys are found murdered in a drainage ditch. The town is gutted. The camera drifts over candlelight vigils and frantic press lines. People want answers. They want someone to punish. Into that pressure step 3 local teenagers, Damian Eccles, Jason Baldwin, and Jesse Miskelly Jr. Teenagers who stood out, who listened to music that frightened the conservative town, who wore black, who were easy to make into a story. What did the evidence show? Practically nothing. No physical link tied them to the crime scene. No credible eyewitness placed them with the children that night. What emerged instead were confessions and speculation, including a coerced confession from Miskelly, a young man with an IQ around 72, who had been interrogated for hours. For years, the prosecution leaned on guilt by association and fear of the unfamiliar. 18 years later, in 2011, they walked free. Not exonerated, but released after an Alford plea. A legal compromise where they maintained their innocence even as they accepted a plea that formally recorded guilt. Think about that limbo. Legally guilty, publicly freed, privately fractured. Their release ignited debates about tunnel vision, cultural bias, and the way a community's need for a villain can overshadow stubborn factual gaps. The real killer, if one exists, distinct from these men, remained free, and the town's wounds continued to fester in the silence that follows a conviction that might be wrong. December 23, 1991. A house fire in Corsicana, Texas consumes a family. 3 young daughters dead, a father watching survivors and suspects in a town quick to name a cause. Cameron Todd Willingham is accused and later convicted of arson and murder. The evidence presented at trial was anchored in burn patterns and fire science that, at the time, seemed authoritative. But the science changed. Years later, independent investigators and fire scientists argued those burn patterns were misinterpreted, that the features prosecutors called proof of accelerants were consistent with ordinary building collapse and post-flashover effects. Beyond the disputed forensics, there were human contradictions. Testimony from a jailhouse informant that later unraveled, prosecutorial narratives that painted Willingham as a remorseless monster because he didn't display expected grief, and experts whose conclusions were later publicly questioned. Appeals dragged on. In 2004, after decades of debate, Willingham was executed. His final statements insisted on innocence, a plea that echoed into a courtroom that had already decided. The case raises a darker question. When our scientific consensus shifts, what happens to those sentences built on older certainties? The flicker of doubt in the lab becomes the thunder of irreversible state action. The family left behind, the man who died proclaiming his truth. All of it sits under a pall of agency lost to error. These are not outliers. They are examples of a pattern. Systems that prioritize neat endings over hard, uncomfortable truth. When investigators, prosecutors, or jurors substitute certainty for inquiry, the consequences are catastrophic. The families of victims deserve answers that withstand scrutiny, not answers that soothe the public. The men and women labeled monsters deserve a rigor of evidence that leaves no room for the doubt that eventually emerges. The real horror isn't only the crimes themselves. It's the institutional willingness to accept a convenient culprit so life can proceed. It is the slow erosion of trust when the official story crumbles. It is the loneliness of those who watch a person vanish behind bars while the real threat remains at large. In the film noir shadows of these stories, truth is not a cinematic reveal, but a stubborn, ugly thing that refuses to fit the tidy narrative. Slow pan away from a courthouse at night. The lights dim. The city breathes. Justice should seek truth, not merely closure. If we value justice, we must tolerate uncertainty, reopen old wounds with new questions, and accept that sometimes the most unsettling fact is this: we got it wrong. And while that admission is cold, it may be the only way to bring warmth back to the hollow places left behind.